September 21st, 2022 meeting of the Ames Planning and Zoning Commission will come to order. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory body of the City of Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and major site development plans, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and the comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only one time on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card up here on the podium and present it to the recording secretary, who is Eileen back toward the back there. We ask that you come to the microphone at the podium to speak so that all comments may be recorded. The order of the proceeding for each item on the agenda will be as follows. The city staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff. The applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. The commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Then members of the audience will be invited to come forward to offer comments and questions. Once public comment is closed, city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all presentations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for the city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and the applicant for clarification. And with that, we'll move on to our first agenda item, which is introduction of commission members. And we'll start over here today.
Mike LaPetra.
John Emery.
Mike Clayton.
Mike Sullivan.
Julie Winter.
Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, approval of the minutes of September 7th, 2022. Hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at them. Is there any discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The minutes are approved. Item 5 on the agenda is the public forum. This is for items that are not on the agenda that you would like to talk about. Is there anybody that has an item that they would like to talk to that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, then we will close the public forum. Next item on the agenda is public hearing on a planned residential district amendment for 400 and 500 West Crystal Loop.
Good evening, Commission. Tonight before you, it's an amendment to the Bricktown PRD. This PRD was originally approved back in 2017. This is South Duff and that cemetery that's located south of that newer Come and Go to the north, or actually the Come and Go sits right here. The amendment pertains specifically to these two lots back here, 400 and 500 West Crystal Loop, or lots 9 and 10. The PRD plan was approved originally in 2017 with a maximum amount of units and a limit on the number of 3 bedrooms that they could have. This amendment does not impact that. They still fall within those requirements. The reason why it's a major amendment is because there's the code lists out requirements that determine whether it's a major or minor. Major amendments have to come before you and the city council. One of those is an intensification of use. So when they have made other changes on site, which the staff report walks you through, They've made 2 previous changes where the number of buildings didn't change, but the floor plans of the units did. So the number of bedrooms increased. So in order to not come before you at that time to move things along a little quicker, what they did was on the plan was they removed a building each time back here. So what they did is they did a minor amendment to split this into two buildings and increase the bedrooms and took this building off the plan. And then they changed these buildings. They changed the total number of units, but again, the bedrooms increased. So they removed this building from the plan. So now they're ready to develop back here. The layout is pretty much identical to what was approved with the exception of instead of 10 buildings with 6 units, they're going to have 10 buildings of 4 units each. What they'll have attached 2-car garages. Those elevations were in their single story. The elevations were in your packet. The only thing that's really interesting to this is staff's recommendation does include a condition of approval. Currently, the only access into these back 2 lots is this road right here. And as you can see, there's a detention pond here and a detention pond here. The fire code states that when there's 30 or more townhomes that aren't sprinkled, that there needs to be a second access. So they had planned the second access in the original approval. It just hadn't been built because construction hadn't occurred back here yet. So the condition that staff has included in our recommendation is that this road be completed by the time once that 30th unit is constructed. This parcel it's not part of the original PRD, but it's the same owner. So there's no issues with kind of working through that with property owners. They also, it'll be gated at Kitty Hawk. So the only access will be to police and fire. And it'll be gated at this north entrance as well. So it won't be used for everyday use. It will only be in the slight chance that that's the only way emergency access can reach the site. And this is zoned differently. It's zoned HOC, so it's not an issue to have that use of a drive across that property as well. So I can answer any questions that you might have. Staff's recommendation is approval of the amendment, but with that condition that road be constructed when the number of units reaches that point of code requirement.
Parking has not changed.
Nope. Well, slightly. They still exceed the minimum parking. What they did have in the original plan was they had some surface parking here, some surface parking here. Those 2 areas will still have, I think there was 17 in each row. And then there were a few parking stalls, surface in the corners. And those have been removed on the proposed plan. But each unit has a 2-car garage and then a driveway. So there's plenty of parking for each unit. And then those 17 stalls would be additional above and just what's required for back here. And then overall, the PRD exceeds what's required.
Okay.
Yeah, assume the emergency access, then at some point, the developer will probably develop that parcel also.
Yeah, and the access will have to stay.
Okay.
The only
And
reason
some-
why that access would ever go away or could go away is if each unit was sprinkled, and that's unlikely to occur retroactively. So if they're not being initially constructed that way, it'll always be a requirement. And this is all airport property to the south and to the west. So access from those 2 directions is not going to happen as well.
Is there a reason that second access is going to be gated at both ends?
Just because it's only for fire access. So the fire code requires the 2 accesses. The amount of traffic really isn't the trigger. So the one main access on West Crystal out to Duff is sufficient for that, the number of daily trips that will occur. But in the event that for some reason that road would be blocked or impassable, they want that the code requires a second access.
And when they develop that lot, then there'll be not a naturally occurring access, but a planned access.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the shape or the exact location may change, but yeah, it will connect from that northwest east corner to Kitty Hawk.
And the apartments that they're building there are not going to be sprinkled?
I believe these are up here. These, there's an access drive here and there's an access drive here. So that's how they reach their 2 points of access for this development, for this part of the PRD. Because these are all 3-story, these are 72 units, these 4 are 60 units, and then these 2, I believe, drop down to 45 units with the last amendment.
So
they're sprinkled.
these are not apartments per the building code.
Yeah.
So they don't have a sprinkler requirement.
It's like 1-story townhomes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they don't
Like
have a
one
unit above or
attached.
behind, so they can be built under a different building code. That's why they have a lower threshold of the second access. If they were actually sprinkled in apartments, you could have 200 units back here. So there's a big distinction between whether you do fire sprinklers or not.
Are there any other questions for staff? Is the developer here tonight?
I am actually with Jensen Group. I'm the architect of the project, so I'm here to answer any
Yeah, okay, you can come up front, that'd be great.
if needed.
So I'm here on behalf of Jensen Group. I'm the architect on the project. So any questions you have related to details, you've done an excellent job kind of explaining everything. But if you guys have any other questions related to building details or anything, I'm here to answer them.
And you are,
Kyle Ewell.
Does anybody have any questions for him? Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks for the trip up to the.
That was easy. Is there anybody from the public that would like to come up and either speak or ask a question? Seeing none, then I'll close the public comment period. Is there anything else in staff would like to say or
I don't
for
think
the
so.
developers? Okay.
So we're looking for motion then, or?
Or any other discussion? Is
Discussion.
there any other discussion that we?
I don't have any thoughts on this one. I mean, it seems
Okay.
it's quite nice that they did, it seems like the number of units remains the same in the overall development. So they didn't change anything that way. And it seems quite nice the way they laid it out and just, a nice housing alternative.
If there is no other discussion, then I would entertain a motion.
I move, this is alternative 1, right?
Mhm.
Okay. I move that we recommend that City Council approve the major site development plan amendment for lots 9 and 10 to modify the site plan to allow the proposed building layout described in this report and the following conditions. A, complete construction, the fire access connection across the adjacent north parcel to Kitty Hawk prior to issuance of building permits for more than 30 units in total located on lots 9 and 10.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion is approved. Next item on the agenda is a zoning text amendment for front yard parking and driveway standards.
I'm going to go down there for a second.
Okay.
All right. So tonight we are talking about changes that affect primarily 1 and 2 family homes across the city, regardless of their zoning district. The city has had standards for driveway paving and restrictions on front yard parking for almost 4 decades. Due to some information about some code enforcement cases and an investigation kind of into what was kind of the status of a lot of potential violations across the city, City Council received a report from inspection staff and from the Planning and Housing Department kind of discussing what would be an approach to look at rectifying what we believe is over 450 non-compliant driveway situations kind of across the city. And we measured that number kind of going back to 2008, the best we could with aerial photos. Some of those may not actually be non-compliant when you get through the analysis of truthing out the actual sites, but a substantial number would easily be paved areas that had not sought permission and were unlikely to have actually met the standards before they paved their driveways. So City Council received that information, and through that review, they decided that they would like to essentially allow for existing paving to exist, let's say as of October 1st, 2022. But they also wanted to modify standards that actually made it a little bit more permissible to address parking on these single family properties. So what we're going through tonight is a discussion of the changes in both the permitting process, because we wanted to evolve the permit to make it clear what is necessary before you get paving done in the city of Ames. And then we also wanted to add more standards. There was some lack of clarity on different standards that could have been open to interpretation. But at the end of the day, we're looking to create more opportunities for parking on people's property. So I'm going to walk through that, and then I'll take questions about the issues. And you have an attachment of a draft text amendment that we would work to refine with the city attorney's office after we get some direction from the commission on how this would look. So the basics of what we look to regulate as the city is really the front yard. The city, those hatched areas represent front yards. The way that is defined in our code is it's from the closest point of a home to a side property line. So if you have for example, on that curved example on the right side, even though it's the back corner of your house, it's technically the closest part of your house to the street. So that front yard can wrap significantly around a structure. If it's very rectilinear lot and a very perpendicular orientation to your house, it's pretty much just your front facade extended across the lot. But when your house has some recesses to it or secondary facades to it, it does continue to be a front yard. So the city has had this concept since the late 80s. This particular diagram and the clarity of exactly what it means has been around since about 2008. That was a reason we looked back to 2008 when this was adopted in the municipal code as a graphic to explain that standard. So what that means is that once you're in a front yard, you're only allowed to park a vehicle if it is on a paved surface, and a paved surface can only exist legally if it leads to a garage or to a parking space that is not in the front yard. So that is the intent of our regulations, to ensure that we have driveways that lead to garages and not extra paved parking areas kind of scattered across the lot. So this was a big concern. Really back in the 80s, before we had paving requirements, we had a lot more gravel unfinished kind of parking areas across town in different older neighborhoods, especially with rental properties. So the city wanted to make that clear exactly how paved areas had to work, so it just didn't kind of spread and scatter across the lot. At that point in time, we thought it was more valuable to limit those paved areas to ensure there was residential compatibility. Especially in that time, there's a lot smaller lots than maybe what you see in a modern subdivision. You definitely weren't seeing 3-car garages as a common thing in the 1980s, versus if you go to a new subdivision now, probably over 60% of the lots have 3-car garages. So this doesn't deal with the garage issue. That's a separate standard in our code. It's really just the driveway paving for areas that don't lead to a garage is really what we're focused on. So the two parts that go into this are a combination of zoning and engineering standards. So as the city, what we will have in the new permit process, and we've instituted this already, we don't have the new standards in the permit process, but we have implemented a new permit process. So now planning and the Public Works Department will review any driveway change in the city. In the past, there was not a review process. You needed to speak with the inspections division and seek permission, but there wasn't a formal approval process for it. So you can see where there was a gap in not really understanding that you're supposed to talk to inspections to get that permission versus now there's a permit. So the Public Works Department will always be focused on what we're calling the driveway approach or the curb cut itself, which is that connection to the public street. So Public Works will review from the sidewalk to the street into the curb and gutter area. Planning is responsible for the area beyond the sidewalk that leads onto the private property. So we'll coordinate that review together because we do have standards that require that driveway approach to also match the on-site driveway itself. So you can't have a wider approach than is necessary to reach your garage. That's pretty critical in our eyes for two reasons. It helps minimize conflicts on a driveway with the sidewalk, but also importantly, it leaves more curb space for on-street parking. So the more curb cuts we have, the wider the curb cuts, the less public parking there is available. And we don't see a need to do that. And we've had a standard for quite some time that we expect driveways to be the minimum width necessary, not the maximum width that you might want. So we'll continue that concept through in the update as well. So again, this diagram, try to keep this in your mind. This is not changing. We're still measuring the front yard the same way, but we're going to give an exception essentially to have additional paving in some circumstances in that front yard. So this one is the one we're going to start with. This is really the bulk of the issue. Of that 450 cases that we were able to identify, I would say over 300 of them were this situation, where someone has added flared parking, but it doesn't actually go to the side yard. So the diagram on the right where the red lines are, that's illustrating that that property may become compliant under current code. They would have to pave another 9 by 19 foot slab of concrete to do so. And they might have enough space. Technically, their property line, they have at least 9 feet from that property line. They could do it. However, the one on the left, they do not have 9 feet between the wall of their garage and the property line. So that space where that truck is parked in that picture could never become a legal parking space. So if we were to do an enforcement action, that paving would have to be removed because there's no way to become compliant. So City Council looked at these examples and decided that essentially for two reasons. One, they wanted to provide more opportunity for on-site parking, which again would free up street parking space probably, give you more flexibility as a resident to use your driveway and some parking area on your site. But secondly, they weren't really interested in aesthetically having, if we're going to allow the flared parking in the first place, they weren't interested in why are we requiring another almost 200 square feet of concrete to be paved, because a vehicle was always allowed to park on that flare in the first place. So that aesthetic impacts there, whether you put that slab of concrete in the side yard or not. So that was, I think, the main rationale for council to say we want to provide more flexibility, and aesthetically, there's really no difference whether you have that slab or not in the side yard. So by doing this creates quite a bit of flexibility for many properties across the city. And it resolves a number of those cases where it's very common to see this. I'm sure all of us have seen this in almost every neighborhood in the city. Many people probably don't even know that's not really permitted the way that has been done. So it was pretty straightforward for council to address that issue. Oops, I keep pushing the wrong computer. So this is a good illustration of what won't be permitted in most circumstances. So with this house, it has, I believe this house has a 1-car garage, and you can see the white paving, right? It extends to the middle of the home. In this case, what we are going to create is an option that every home that has at least one space beyond the front setback would be allowed to have a 20-foot wide driveway, essentially a 2-car wide driveway. And that 20 feet is going to be measured from the property line in towards the house. And we're saying adjacent to the property line because it's possible it needs to be a couple feet off the property line due to grading issues or something else. So it's not necessarily going to literally be from the property line 20 feet in, but approximately 20 feet in. But what this does illustrate is that you cannot pave further into the middle of your house if you have a 2-car driveway already. Or if you, and you can't just option, let's say there was 10 feet to the side here, you still wouldn't be able to pave to the middle just because you want to. You would have to go towards the side property line first. So this is the approach to try to equalize that everybody kind of gets 2 cars in most circumstances, but try to preserve the residential character at the same time. So with this code amendment, this will now be permissible. It would not be permissible under the current code. A 1-car garage was never permitted to pave in front of the house for any reason under the current language. You could only go to the side. So on a corner lot situation, there is no proposal to change it. In this condition, we've decided that creating that parking space on the side of the home was not of interest for a residential character to permit that or to promote that. So the prohibition of parking in the front yard would still stand. So on this property, it would be nearly impossible to ever comply with the parking in the side or rear yard because you would have to wrap around the whole home and create a very large paved area off to the side there. And this would be considered non-compliant to do this, nor would be permitted in the future. And interesting enough, so in old subdivisions, so prior to 2000, the zoning allowed a street side setback of 15 feet. A front setback is 25 feet. So in the older subdivisions, if you were to allow for that parking, you were always going to be as almost 5 feet from a sidewalk for the length of that sidewalk to allow for a car to park. And I think that was the main reason that we didn't want to promote that as a parking option. We just didn't feel that extra concrete up against the sidewalk with the vehicles and the just the proximity to door swing and all of that stuff was really in the interest of the city. There are a handful of non-compliant situations across the city because of that 15-foot setback. Now in newer subdivisions, it's 2 25-foot setbacks. So when you look at this house, it has more space between the garage on the side than in older subdivisions, but we're saying it's a uniform rule. We're not going to permit that paving on the garage side we're not going to permit that paving on the street side of the house. It will be considered a front yard as it is now. And then kind of a miscellaneous category of some other issues that come up. This is where there was some ambiguity in the expectations of the code about how much paving you could do and what really was a driveway that led to a garage. So on the left, you can see different versions of garages and paving. In some way, they reach a garage, so it's probably permissible what was approved there. But the 2 curb cuts and really 3 curb cuts sequentially there on that loop was not desirable to perpetuate that pattern. So we're not allowing for these double driveways to exist unless you have a larger lot or a corner lot. So we're cleaning up that the language about the driveway leading to the garage, as well as getting a second curb cut, won't occur in very many situations. And then the example on the right was just classic front yard parking. It doesn't lead to anything. It's just parking in your front yard. So that double driveway or a single driveway, neither version of that would be permissible in a front yard. So that's now going to be clear as well in terms of loop driveways that they still have to go to a garage. So this diagram is pretty simplistic, but I thought we could at least talk about some of the things that change here. So we start on the left. You have the 2-car garage home, pretty standard home across the city. And so what that's going to permit, it is not uncommon again for homes in subdivisions, let's say from the 70s and the 80s, if they had a 2-car garage, to have the driveway actually only be the width of the garage door, which would commonly be 16 feet. So very, very tight to have 2 cars on a 16-foot apron. So even if you have a 2-car garage, you could go to that 20 feet. So now if you wanted to add 4 feet of concrete onto the side of your driveway, just have a little more space for your 2-car garage, you're allowed to do that. Under the current code, it didn't allow for that because the width was supposed to be the width of the garage door, not whatever width you wanted to have it be in front of the garage. But then the new major benefit is that orange area, that flare would be allowed to exist now, whether it led to parking in the side or rear yard. So that orange area is really the new part that would not have been permitted under current code. So then we go to the middle illustration, and that's a one-car detached garage. We do not have a minimum driveway width specified in the zoning ordinance. We have parking lot standards, but they aren't the same thing as a driveway on single-family properties. So we're proposing to match kind of the lowest common denominator. There's a lot of older homes in the city that have an 8-foot driveway. So you would probably say a modern home probably expects a 10-foot driveway, but to recognize older homes have gotten by with 8-foot driveways for a long time, we're recommending to the council and to the Planning and Zoning Commission that we set 8 feet as that minimum standard. And as I said in the commission action form, kind of give you examples. Parking in a parking lot is a 9-foot width as a typical stall in Ames, not 8 foot, but we are going a little bit narrower than that. If someone wants to be wider, they can. Again, on that one-car garage one, and this is one I think you have to kind of think about a little bit. The way that is intended to be worded, and this is probably the one that's going to need the most crafting and making sure everybody's on the same page, is in that situation where you have a compliant garage space all the way in the rear yard. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can then pave more parking in the front yard just for extra convenience. Council, and we didn't have language when we did the staff report in July. We just talked through the concepts, and they definitely didn't want extra front yard parking if you had compliant parking in the rear yard. That was a lot to do with alley access. We didn't go through this example, but this is, I'm sorry. So the way this bullet reads at the bottom actually explains how this would work. Whenever you have a one-car garage, you would have the ability to get to 20 feet in your front yard. If that detached garage in the rear was a 2-car garage, you would not be eligible for any additional paving in your front yard. Because the whole concept is you get 2 side-by-side spaces on your property somewhere, not more than that as front yard parking. So that last bullet tries to explain that concept to you there. And then on the third one, again, that kind of, it reflects more of a 3-car garage situation, but it does show you how a taper is commonly permitted. It would be required to be that way now once we set that driveway width to match that of a 2-car garage. Sometimes in the past, if you had a 3-car garage, you could have had a curb cut that was almost 30 feet wide versus a typical residential driveway's 20. So we're going to clarify again, if just because you have a wider garage doesn't mean you can have a straight shot with an extra wide driveway all the way out to the street. You'll have to have that same taper as illustrated in that diagram there. So I think this kind of sums up the intent of our code changes. There's a lot more in the details in there, but again, the kind of recap, the intent is to create a permit, applies to all situations. We are going to add the option for the flare. We're going to set an allowance for essentially a 2-car wide driveway for everybody. And then we're still going to have driveway openings, driveway approaches need to match that of the garage width and be proportional to that. And then the permit process has some other changes that go along with that. We have to, it's kind of so you'll see we have changes to Article 4, which is where standards are, but also to Article 15, which is where process is. We need to kind of clean up the difference between how we deal with commercial properties, as well as now creating a new driveway permit and not have it be confusing with these other things. So there's changes in both sections, even though the standards are only affecting the 1 and 2 family homes that we described tonight. So there's more detail about how we get to what I've described. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer that. Any other comments, we'll pass that along to the council.
I guess, how do you want to handle questions on each of them? Do you just want rapid fire, or do you want to go back to?
Pick your
Okay.
pick your poison here.
I guess one thing I was thinking about, I used to live in the Old Town area. I would imagine that there are a lot of non-compliance there, not the flares, but sort of the parking in the front yard issue. And I guess I'm curious, for each rental unit in town, they require 2 parking spaces. Is that the code?
Yes. So
Okay.
the current rental code is that a single family homes, I assume what we're talking about, apartments are different.
Okay.
A single family home to be licensed as a rental must have 2 paved parking spaces,
Okay.
and they can be tandem.
So
But they
I'm
do have to be two paved parking spaces on the property.
okay. Okay. So that for example, big Victorian houses that got kind of converted to a couple different units, then is that then multiple units they can use on-street parking as part of their
Oh. So
Okay.
there may be units that existed that are grandfathered, but if it's a new unit coming on to the rental rolls,
Okay.
so one that has never been licensed that wants to become licensed, you have to provide the parking on site or you cannot become a rental.
Okay. So in that case, then, if you have lots of, let's just say, grandfathered units in that historic downtown area, and then you try to enforce, and I get what we're trying to do here with like not parking in front yards, but if you try to then enforce folks, I mean, there's lots of it going on in between like the 800 block and the 1200 block of Burnett, probably. It's on Clark too. I've seen it a lot. If you enforce like, so essentially if something is not paved then and someone's parking in that front yard, then they can get a code enforcement violation and say that you must park on street or you can't park there anymore. Is that how that would be
So,
handled?
yeah, so it's kind of interesting. The zoning ordinance leads to a ticket for parking on grass is what it turns out to be if there's a citation by the parking division. So that's true today, and that'll still be true after these code amendments. Parking on grass in your front yard will never be permissible.
Okay. Okay.
So if that's something that's happening, the parking division would drive out there if there was a complaint and they just put a ticket on the
They
windshield
ticket
and say you're
Okay.
non-compliant parking. So it doesn't go to the homeowner for not having paving or the property owner. It goes to the person that illegally parked their vehicle on grass.
What about gravel? Like in situations where things are
So it's
gravel.
not, so again, you get into these conditions that you would not permit now. So gravel is not an acceptable parking material. But if it's been there before the standard existed, the zoning ordinance allows it to continue as a nonconformity.
Okay. Gotcha.
So that's where it gets, there's a lot to sort out on an older property about which standards actually apply. So no new gravel would be permissible. But if it's
Okay.
been there for 30 years that way, it's going to be grandfathered in as a nonconformity.
I guess that's my only general concern, just from a general sense, when we talk about, especially on illustration C, I think a lot of folks, there may not be garages leading back to there necessarily, but I think I heard you say that it doesn't have to lead back to a garage. The driveway doesn't in order to be compliant.
Has to get beyond the front of the house.
Okay.
So in
okay.
the current code, if there was no garage and the paving stopped here, that would still be legitimate.
Okay. Okay. That is
So it has
good
to get
then.
to, it can go to a garage or the side or rear yard.
Okay.
Because
And
we
I
don't
know-
actually require covered parking for anybody.
Right. That's very evident with rentals here.
Everybody. There's no covered parking requirement.
Yeah. I'm just trying
I
to
do
think
wanna-
of.
Because of what you said, I do want to point out uniquely for Old Town, we have a zoning district called the Single Family Conservation Overlay District.
Okay.
It includes a limitation of no more than 12 feet of width for a driveway. We intend to carry that forward.
Okay.
So that's in the single family conservation overlay, that regardless of the width of your garage or whatever you're doing on your property, the area between the front of your house and the street can be no more than 12 feet. And so we as staff are not proposing to undo that standard, and that's
Right.
uniquely Old Town.
Okay, gotcha. And then just as a general matter, let's say someone on this illustration C, they live on a busy street in town.
Yep.
Is this new updates to the code going to dictate, let's say, for example, they're trying to pull back, the garage may be further back, but they really want to do a turnaround of some sort, a paved turnaround? Will this ordinance allow that to happen? Like if you're living on Grand or something like that and you don't want to back out into traffic all the time?
So we have a turnaround allowance now. It'll get spelled out in a little bit clearer manner with the update, but it only applies to very limited situations. So you'd have to be, the way it's drafted, it says 13,080 average daily trips. I'm sorry. Traffic counts of at least 13,000 vehicles a day is the number in the code now. We're going to drop it to 10,000.
Okay.
But essentially that's 13th Street. It's Grand Avenue, potentially Duff.
Mhm.
So it's not very many streets that'll get to that 10,000 vehicles a day standard. But if you have that, you would be permitted to have a notch that allows you a minimum amount of paving needed to have a notch so you can do a 3-point turn and head out.
Okay. I would say just as a general suggestion, I get that you don't want to have everybody paving all their backyard either, but that could be a suggestion to look into the code to add something like that or to change the standard. Just thinking about a lot of folks do have that.
Which standard are you suggesting?
Just more allowances on that turnaround and what folks can do with their backyard with the driveway in mind. Because the front yard is more so the aesthetic, but
We're not addressing the backyard, are we?
If you could just clear, I'm not sure I'm completely tracking what you would want altered.
so on the illustration C,
Yep.
if you go side yard, you're going back. Once you hit that rear yard, right where the dwelling line ends,
Right here.
could someone build, and if the garage were set back further,
Yeah,
could
so-
you build
Sure.
a
So I get what
nicer
you're saying.
pad?
So the only limit on paving in your rear yard is your total lot coverage.
Okay.
There's no rear yard coverage standard. The only limit on the turnaround is in the front yard.
Okay, so they could do what they wanted in
Yeah.
that circumstance if it's rear yard,
Yep.
as long as it complies with, okay,
As long as you meet that overall coverage number.
great.
Yeah, everything's really focused on the front of the house to the
Okay.
street.
So I have a question. I'm trying to, reading through this, making sure I understand, but was the direction from council simply to look at those, like reconciling the existing violations and finding a way to, I guess, to solve that problem? Or was it also to look into improvements or changes with some direction to the code for driveway requirements? You understand what I'm asking?
The motivation for the review was non-compliant paving. As a result of the review, it did two things. One, essentially make the existing conditions okay. We're going to
Right.
make them non-conforming or pre-existing.
Yep.
And then also also amend the standards to allow for additional paving options in the front yard, which is essentially that flare
Yep.
and the 2-car wide driveway.
So, there's a few things I have specific questions on, but I guess generally I'm for, if we weren't enforcing this and, over a period of time, we definitely want to allow existing uses, these people, it should be allowed, in my opinion. I agree with that first point about existing uses being allowed, but generally I do have concern about changing the character and nature of neighborhoods by allowing, double the amount of parking or increasing the amount of concrete in people's front yards and the cars that'll be parked. I mean, you see lots where I recognize two of those from my neighborhood, actually, where there was a lot, and I see a lot more concrete on there since that one property was installed. It was about a year ago. And I do think people would have concerns with allowing what I see is kind of a dramatic expansion of front yard parking. And as far as changing the character of neighborhoods, I don't think a lot of maybe some neighborhoods in Ames, but a lot of neighborhoods I think have adequate street parking. So I guess that's broadly what my concern is, I guess, with some of these additional items. I agree with the first bullet, that permitting of existing driveway conditions, because I think there needs to be a cutoff date and then we start enforcing what's on the books, certainly. But I guess generally I'd like to have a discussion or hear from the rest of the commission on kind of what the philosophy is, or what if generally this concept is, if you're encouraged by it and want to pursue it, I guess, as a recommendation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question on the flare on illustration B, the red flare. I had thought that something like that wouldn't be allowed unless it went back along the house. Is that correct?
Current code would say that. New code doesn't require that extra 19 feet behind the
Okay.
house.
That was easily cleared up.
And the other thing is, if you don't have 9 feet from your driveway to the property line, we would still let with the flare, you would still be able to add 4, 5, 6, 7 if that's what you have. Currently, we wouldn't because it had to get to the side of the house. So even if you wanted just a little more width and you didn't necessarily need the full 9, the answer would be no. You can't do that because it's extra paving in the front yard that didn't lead to something else. Now we would permit that to give you that extra width on this only towards the side property line. That's the key element to it.
Kelly, I'm assuming this is addressed in a different part of the driveway stuff, but alternatives like permeable paving and bricks and things like that, that technically people can still do that with this update, right?
Anything other than asphalt or concrete requires the municipal engineer to agree to accept it as an alternative. So
Do they have to have special plans from anyone, or can they just say,
it's a case by case decision by the engineer. It's not something we commonly see requested. So I wouldn't have been involved in that process previously. So I can't tell you what people have gone through in the past to do that.
okay. I think it would be nice in this update that if we're adding more paving and more concrete, to have that alternative available for people who want to go down that path. I realize it might be more expensive or different materials, but it might be nice.
And I don't think we object to that. I think we would have to spell out a spec. So it's not someone that's saying I'm putting bricks out on dirt
Yeah. it has
without
to
a
be-
base that's going to hold the pavers in place and actually function as a driveway. Because we get all varieties of people that may not want to meet the code,
Right. And
at
then
least not the
pave
intent.
drainage. all that.
And say, yes, I'm just doing this. And we all know it won't work for more than 6 months. So that's why right now it takes that individual decision. But if we were to make it a paver situation or something along those lines, we'd have to just spell out a spec that would be consistently applied. And that would resolve the concern.
Okay.
We just don't have that in the code now, but staff doesn't have a problem with that.
I know with a solution to that, while I'd make it look nicer and stuff, the underlayment can be concrete, and then the pavers or tile or whatever. But
Yeah, I mean, if it has a concrete underlayment, that would be considered compliant with the code because there's a
Right.
concrete base. It's the
Yeah.
permeable ones that would be maybe a little different.
A lot of times people that want to do permeable paver are trying to avoid the concrete on purpose.
Yeah.
Like that's the idea, is you're infiltrating stormwater.
Mhm.
So usually that's, I mean, if it's purely decorative, they might want to do that, but generally,
Yes, but like Kelly says, there, even in my neighborhood, I know there's not pavers, but tile down with nothing other than sand underneath.
Yeah.
And in Iowa, it may work for 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, 4 or 5 years. There's going to be heave.
yeah.
Yeah. So
There's
for,
design standards for permeable
Yeah,
pavers.
there are.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Do we need to
And there's even.
spell that out? In
I would probably
I
leave
think
that
we
up.
would, I mean, just because of the variety of products, I would default to saying you need to ask on a case by case basis. We would approve it if it meets an industry standard.
Yeah.
But that's probably where we would prefer to stay because of the variety of products that could be suggested. And we can't pick a product as
Right.
the one
But
that
do we need to
code.
say that in the code?
it already says the municipal engineer can approve a substitute paving material. And that'll still be the language that's in here. If it needed to say asphalt, concrete, and pavers, then we would have to create more definition behind pavers
more
because
complicated.
Mhm.
Portland cement and asphalt have definitions behind them.
Yep.
Industry standards that go with that. I don't think we need to spell it out. If for some reason there's something really precise that needed to be added, that's the only thing I would say you would put in a motion for this.
Okay, on illustration C, they'll be able to go pave towards the middle of the house farther.
To get to 20 feet, yes.
Okay.
I think that's the biggest one for discussion. That's the intent, is that everybody can get a side-by-side driveway if they want that.
But I thought too that in all the issues that we've had with developments, we don't want the garage and driveway to be the focal of the houses.
So in the small lots, what you're talking about is we want the entrance to be located in front of the garage,
Right.
but we allow for all homes to have up to a 3-car garage that faces the street.
Okay.
So in that context of trying to add some flexibility, going to the 2, that was seen. It's a trade-off, right? There's a little bit more paving in the front yard, but it adds that extra on-site parking space.
Okay, and then in all these illustrations that you have, okay, in that front yard flared parking issue where that pickup truck is sitting,
There you go.
yeah. What we're doing today is making it so that if this guy has gravel there now, he can still keep doing that.
Gravel was never permissible and won't be permissible in the future.
But also you're, if I'm reading this correctly, because it has not been enforced, you're going to allow everything to be grandfathered in where there's parking right now.
Nope. Paving. Illegal parking is not being grandfathered.
Right.
Paving is being allowed to be there. So if you never paved it, you have no right to call that a parking space because you've always had to pave it. So council is not undoing the paving requirement. They're saying they're accepting more versions of paving than they did previously.
Okay, and going back to hers, if somebody's laid tile where that pickup truck is, so there's
If
not
it is-
gravel, but
if it
it's-
is not asphalt or concrete, it's not grandfathered. You would have to
And it
seek a
hasn't been
permit to
approved.
have
You'd
it
have
be
to-
there, and the municipal
You'd have to
engineer
know.
may or may not agree for that to be there. So that's a detail we didn't go through all the different ways you could maybe have paving on the site, but the intent was it had to be paved for it to be considered a legal nonconformity on your property. So the question of tile and such has never been discussed by the city council or even staff.
okay. Now, but everything, as long as it's paved right now, before this thing passes the city council, if I go out and put a flare towards my front, towards the middle of my house, and I already have a double driveway, and I put it on the other side, it'll be okay because it's going to be grandfathered in.
It's going to depend on what date council puts in the ordinance. They haven't picked one yet. So I'm pretty sure that it won't go back in time.
Right. So,
It might be August 1st though, because they reviewed this on July 26th. They might pick August 1st because we already have that prohibition. It's like it's a new standard. It's an existing prohibition.
but what I'm understanding you're trying to do is make everything okay and
So I don't know if council wants to, prospectively set a date that everything's compliant. Usually when you're creating a new standard that no one has ever had before,
right.
they usually look a little bit forward to give people a chance to get things done. In this case, I would agree. It seems like you would set the date in a more limited fashion to make sure people don't do something you already don't want in the first place.
It should it requires a building permit, wouldn't it? to
It
build
doesn't. That's
No.
the issue. It requires a written approval. Now the current code now says from the planning director, but that's only been in effect for 3 weeks. That last set of code amendments you made in the summer changed it from an inspections person to the planning department, but it still doesn't require a quote permit. The word permit's not there, which is what we'll say
Some
caused the
problems.
ambiguity of whether it was necessary. So it never has required a building permit, and it still will not require a building permit. So if you ask the question that way, you get a bad answer if the answer is no. But the real answer is you don't need a building permit, but you need to talk to Public Works, you need to talk to planning and get a driveway permit.
A driveway, okay.
Yeah,
And
and that's the
if-
way it is now, and it'll be more clear after this.
I'd like to be the devil's advocate.
Mhm.
If I know to put a patio in does not require a permit, correct?
I'm not in the inspections division.
Okay.
You can't hold me to
Okay.
interpretations of chapter 5. Typically, flat work does not require a building permit. Say typically.
If I put a patio flat work on the picture on this side, put it to the left, put a patio there, there's nothing that stops me.
Well, can you legally park on a patio?
You cannot.
So
So he's I know what you're describing.
Still
It's
a code
situation
violation.
where you describe
Mhm.
one thing to put it in the ground, but you use it for another.
Right.
It would not be legal because it would not in the future be very clear. You never got a permit for that to exist as parking.
In the future.
And even
And
now
it-
you can't do it. It's just not, there's
It's
no
like parking
file
on
in
your
your address.
grass.
There's nothing in your address file that says you can't. But if there was a code enforcement action, you would lose because you didn't comply with the current standards.
And that's what I have a problem with. How is this going to be ever enforced? Right now, you say you have 458 violations.
Potentially non-conforming
Not- okay.
driveways, but potentially.
Fancy
depends
words,
on-
violations.
There's definitely hundreds of them. Whether it's literally
Right.
450, I don't know.
But all of those, that's why council will put a date in to basically say at X date, all of these are grandfathered moving forward. If
I don't think
have
you
a-
But
have
how
to-
do you enforce?
So I don't think you have to worry about the enforcement side. That's council's job to tell the inspections division how to do code enforcement. That's not really what's on the table for this.
Okay, but we've
what-
had the problem in the past. Is there going to be a solution in
So
the
the
future?
philosophy is by cleaning up the language, making the code absolutely clear this requires something, and then to do communication this winter with as many concrete contractors as we can to hopefully next spring have people that understand what they can and can't do. So
And so
that's where city council is starting, is we're going to improve the language and communicate with concrete contractors to the extent we can. We can't know all of them because people can come from anywhere and pour concrete. So we're hoping communication leads to better compliance going forward, but there will no longer be the excuse, I didn't know, I didn't understand. That will be eliminated with these code amendments. And they're not legitimate excuses, but that is what you would hear from anybody that we called today and said,
Sure.
you don't have paving in the right part of your property. That's what council has told us to do. So that's the best answer I can give you about enforcement.
And that's what I was concerned about is there hasn't been enforcement in the past, or is there going to be in the future?
There will be, because the permit system sets it up for easier enforcement and easier education to people about what needs to happen.
So, on another topic, I think I understand all the bulleted points here, A through H, except for, could you go over item F again and what that means exactly?
Yeah. So again, we didn't go through code language with council, just concepts.
Right.
So in July, what was described was if you have your 2 parking spaces, which you're required to have 2 as a single family home. If you have 2 parking spaces in the rear yard, you don't get the extra paving in the front yard because you are presumed to have the 2 side-by-side spaces that we're trying to accommodate. And the most likely, well, there's only really 2 scenarios where that'll happen. One would be if I had a detached 2-car garage in the back, or if I had alley access. So if I have alley access and my parking's off the alley, I don't get to pave 20 feet of my front yard just to have front yard parking. That's what council said to us when drafting the regulations. If there's rear yard compliant parking, then they're not eligible for the front yard exception.
Okay. Yeah. I understand that now. Okay. Thank you.
anybody else have any other questions?
Are there any other questions?
Well, only thing so I guess after questions, do we move or go towards a motion? Is that the idea? Is that the order?
Well, we'll ask the audience, which there is nobody left. Everybody got up and left.
Oh, I did. Can I point out one other thing?
Sure.
I highlighted it in the report and when in the text amendments, I put in there that we would create this driveway manual, which would really be something like this that gives the public a better understanding of the words and pictures. I would like to go that way, one way or another, whether it's informal or formally there, we'll have that. So I don't know that we'll make that a code reference, but at least a staff handout on the different versions of this would be done.
Maybe on
The manual was meant to be like a little more technical in terms of this is what a taper is, this is where 45, how to do stuff.
Sure.
And some of the interpretations, the range that staff would have for different widths of driveways and things. So that's in there. It may or may not be there, but it doesn't directly affect the code changes.
Sounds like a great
You're
idea.
talking about item E, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that'd be a good idea for the average person.
There's a lot of nuances. Like just on these 3 pictures, there's another 3 versions of these that I could have drawn.
Yeah.
Just to explain what you can and can't do.
The more,
Are you
the
the
more
architect?
drawings, the more.
No,
questions
I
you'll have.
stole that from somewhere else.
Oh, they have to go to him and ask him.
One community did have a 17-page driveway manual.
Little
Holy
excessive.
cow.
They had some particular aesthetic standards that went along with it as well.
Okay, I think it would be a good idea to have something like that, just so, you know, the average homeowner coming in off the street that has questions about what he can and can't do.
Yep, it's a lot easier
With
to
their driveway than.
to do this than to walk through 3 pages
Yes.
of code.
Only other question I thought of that I had. So the item D there, establish the minimum driveway width of 8 feet. You said the minimum for parking spots is 9 feet, correct?
In a parking lot.
Right.
So it's unclear what a driveway is supposed. There's no width of a driveway in the code.
Okay.
So this would set that, and 8 is the lowest you could
Actually
go.
fit a standard
Right.
car.
And
Because
it'd be
of-
the width. The car is not 8 feet wide. The tires are not 8 feet wide. So you
Right.
could stay on the surface at 8 feet. You just wouldn't have a lot of paved area to step out of your car.
The 8 feet is because of Old Town.
I was gonna say, yeah, the
Older parts of town would have a narrower thing than 8 feet.
areas that were
I was gonna-
designed or built back when they had Model Ts.
Yeah.
And if,
narrower.
I was
if
just
you were
wondering
to
where
s-
that number came from. Okay.
So the 8 feet is to accommodate essentially existing conditions. If you were to go look at an engineering manual, they would say it should be 10 feet because engineers are trying to make it as wide and comfortable as possible versus
Mhm.
minimizing it. But we didn't think we needed to go to 10. That causes a lot of nonconformities that probably aren't necessary. So if I have an 8 or a 9-foot driveway and I want to rebuild it, now I got to go to 10. If I'm a rental property, but I have 9 feet and I'm supposed to have 10, what do I do to get to pay? Like, there's just a lot of things. It seems like going to the lowest common denominator is the better choice here than try to bring everybody up to an extra foot of paving.
And paving that's been added to, an extra foot of paving
It's
does not,
useless.
yes.
Yep. So that's an issue.
It'll
That's
sink.
Yep. That doesn't work. So then you're asking some people to rip stuff out possibly for no real benefit.
Okay, any other questions then? I'd open it up for the public, for public input. If there was anybody that would like to speak, that now would be the time, but seeing none, we'll close the comment period. So I guess with that, then I would entertain a motion if anybody would like to make one.
Second, if you motion this time.
Well, I guess can we talk before we make a motion?
Sure.
Okay. So personally, how I feel and how I want to move on this, I guess I think most of these make sense. I don't, but B and C, I don't want to see. I'm amenable to permitting all existing driveway conditions because it sounds like enforcement wasn't happening. But I don't think expanding, like 2 car wide driveways where there's a single car garage. I don't want to see that all across, with every lot in parts of town where narrow lots, narrow garages. I think that changes the character of some of our neighborhoods to an extent that I'm not comfortable with. So I would say to leave B and C out, but approve an alternative with the rest
Well,
of them.
I think the B though is not requiring a
No, I know.
car wide driveway. Okay.
No, I know.
That's what city standard is 2 cars.
Not,
No, it has
nope,
to
Not
we
city
allow,
standard, but
we don't require side by side.
Right.
Yeah.
We allow
Yeah, they could
tandem.
be stacked.
stacked, yeah. But that's what the city is after is, and that, and B is what they're trying, is a way to do that. And
You can still have two.
flared parking, you know, you're trying to get rid of the in front parking. And that's one way to do it, is by adding flare to the driveway.
Like, Mike, are you basically saying that your biggest issue is like on illustration C? Normally, like if you have a single wide, you don't want someone to be able to double that up and then pave a portion of their front yard. Like that's your main, you just don't want more paving encroaching into the front yard.
Yes, and is
Yeah, coming to the middle of the house.
correct. Yeah.
So that,
Or even if there's a single attached garage allowing for 2-car wide. I
So
guess that's not,
Okay.
is that
That
the
D,
first
that
one?
D was a three-car garage.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that. If there's 3-car garage,
is it the 20 feet or is it the allowance? The 20 feet can go all the way in front of the home beyond the width of the garage.
I just think the driveway should be essentially the width of the garage or some additional, maybe on either side for stepping out. But I don't think we need additional concrete. Like I know exactly where that house is. And I mean, by itself, it's one house. But if you're going to have a neighborhood like where that is in,
But I guess the new standard would be, so everything that's like light on there, that would be allowed. But then that dark part of where the paving is would not be allowed, right,
That-
Kelly?
that white part is
Yeah.
not in front of a garage too, that where the arrow's pointing,
Yeah.
that's a single car garage home. I know exactly where it is.
Okay. And so that technically would be allowed, not just where the white part is, not the dark, but we're making
The
that.
dark is grass right in there.
Oh, okay.
I believe it is.
So I could show you a different version that might illustrate it a little clearer about what you couldn't do. I can bring it up on Beacon. It'll be a house that has a detached 2-car garage, and they also paved in the front to widen the driveway out. So it's a 1-car straight shot driveway with a flare in front of the house. That's something we wouldn't permit. This we would permit under the 20-foot allowance. So do you want to see that example just
Sure.
so we can contrast the two? Might take a second.
But that one, if you flip that flare onto the other side, would be okay.
No, even that one we're looking at is okay. Under this new code, right?
No.
Okay.
I think under the new code.
Yeah, under the new.
Yeah,
Yeah,
under the new
not under
code,
the
it's
existing
allowed.
Current code, it is not.
Current code, it's not,
Yeah,
but
it
if
was-
we
it
It
was
would under the new one.
we recommend
go
to
up 20
council,
feet.
that one is,
Oops.
No, because it was already a 2 cars wide without that flare.
but then it's a 1-car garage, right? It's a single
That's
wide.
a
Yeah,
one-car
in the,
garage.
in the
Was?
example that was up
Okay.
here, yeah, it was a 1-car garage.
So it's not like you have the 2-car garage attached. It's like, it's a fair amount of paving, but I struggle with it because so many people have purchased RVs and everything else. And it's like, where do you,
That's a whole different thing. We're not talking about RVs.
okay.
Boy, it wasn't me that got shot down this time. Gosh.
That was pretty definite.
This is for vehicles.
Is that a residence?
How about boats?
Yeah, I have a feeling that is another can of worms. All right, we'll go there.
So this picture I have cut out now on the right. So this is an example of what
Oh, I know. where that
is
I'm good at reading aerials.
so So let's
Railroad
say the facts are what I'm going to describe is that there's a 2-car garage in the rear back here, and this is the turnaround you were talking about, Julie. There's nothing saying you can't have that.
Okay.
So once you have those 2 cars, you would not be eligible to do this paving because unless it also led to a garage. So the
Okay, so
20 feet would not apply to this house because they have 2 compliant rear yard parking spaces. They have to keep a single width driveway.
So is the paving on the left side beyond the house, that's the paving that would not be eligible after that? Or I'm,
The paving to the
Okay.
right of the flowers. This is what would be prohibited. This
I
would be your
see.
legal driveway to get to your rear yard.
and then they couldn't do, what
And
was that?
They couldn't do paving to the right side of those flowers.
What
Now-
does that lead to?
I just say, let's say the situation was what I said, that
Oh,
there is-
okay.
that there is
Okay.
not a garage there.
Okay.
So then you wouldn't also be able to widen the driveway out to be like this. There's just a lot of things that this still wouldn't permit if that was the case. Versus the one on the left, is that true? Let's widen out to 20 and have 2 parking spaces, even if it encroached into the middle of the property. So I think if I paraphrasing Michael, you're saying really that any of the any extra width, whether it's to the side or the front, you're not in favor of.
I'm not, because I think neighborhoods that have, generally have 3-car garages, they have the parking and people can move to those neighborhoods. But neighborhoods that were planned and designed with, narrower lot widths, and single car garages and detached garages in back, like there's a character to those types of neighborhoods, and I think that changes when you add double the width of driveways and allow for the flare outs and things. So I'm okay with allowing the permitting the existing driveway conditions that have been in place that we haven't enforced up until some date, but I'm not in favor of expanding that, I guess. And it doesn't sound like that was the direction that, I see why you're looking into that, but it doesn't seem like that's the direction that council gave, was to go in that direction. And maybe they will want to, but I guess my recommendation would be not to include those 2 items, B and C.
I think that C should be allowed. The flared one. Yeah, as long as it's going towards the side property line,
Mhm.
not towards the middle of the house necessarily, but the side property line. No harm, no foul there, really, except taking away a little bit of grass. But
I think I could get behind potentially not recommending B as well. The flared, I don't know though, the fact that I guess you shouldn't go back on so many people doing it before, but just during this analysis, there were 300 plus of the 450 non-compliant that were the flared parking. So that's going to be,
it's not,
Well, that would still
not
be allowed.
flared
It'd
parking.
still be
that's-
permitted as an existing driveway condition, I think.
right, but moving forward, I mean, how many people? Yeah, I mean, it's still paving though. You're right, but I want to
just-
try to give people as much flexibility as they can, especially with, if you do have a narrow driveway of some sort, to be able to have one car parked on that flare and then another car being able to go in and out. But I mean, I don't want to prohibit people from doing so much, but
This is a nuance, and I'm not trying to persuade anybody. Like the middle option between B and C is to not allow the 20 feet, but allow for the flare, which means that the driveway approach still has to say at 10. It doesn't get widened out to 16. So like in this example, it would be what this example is. If you didn't allow for the 20, this driveway width would stay at a single car wide driveway, and they could only flare to the side property line. B is what gets you to do this, and even more negative to the aesthetic, as Michael's talking about, is they would have legitimately been able to extend their driveway out to here to match that.
Mhm.
With this new code, they still wouldn't be able to do that
Right.
We're always going to say that the width of the driveway has to be the width of the garage. Now, there's a few houses that don't have any garages, so I'll have to deal with that. But if you have a garage, we're trying to keep that curb cut to the smallest width possible. The flare could always be to a side. The 20 feet's what gets you in front of a house. That's kind of the difference between B and C.
So yeah, I guess the other concern I have with the flare, I guess that I didn't mention, just I'll mention for consideration is, you know, a lot of flares then will, you know, as this one would, if you had gone over to the property line, I mean, you're going to have more vehicles parking right along property lines and neighbors that have to deal with that. That's another reason I don't like the idea of allowing that going in the future.
Because it doesn't sound like there's a required setback on that unless site
We
conditions
have no-
dictate.
We have no paving setback. It only applies to buildings, structures
Mhm.
of a different type.
That's a fair point.
There's the flare gives an option to people that live on cul-de-sacs. You know, you have that one diagram that shows being on the outside of a curve. But what happens when you're on the inside of a curve? And you only have room for a flare would allow for you to do another car.
That's what he's saying. Yeah, put one in here.
Yeah.
I understand the argument. I guess I still don't. I'm not convinced. But that's why there's 7 of us, or 5 of us.
5 of us. Yeah. So how do we want to move? Yeah, how do we want to move forward with this?
Well, I entertain a motion if anybody would, if there is one that somebody would like to make. And you could make an, like, say, alternative 1, but then without something too.
Could we say something like with special council consideration of option
And you could do that too.
B?
Yeah,
Not council. It'd be him.
no,
No?
council.
Well, more
You're
so,
not
I mean,
recommending
this is
anything
going
to
to
We're
be.
making a recommendation to council.
This-
Make a
We
recommendation.
make a
to
recommendation to council. So when they talk about this the next
Right.
meeting, we can
I thought you were
say
talking about,
planning and
permitting,
zoning.
Right.
Yeah. It could
We
not.
can recommend alternative 1, or we can recommend a version of alternative 1.
Yeah,
Or-
you can make changes to
Is
the
that right?
alternative
That's
as
right.
Yeah,
as
you
printed
can,
right here.
you kind of can do whatever you want. I would say work from 1 if you're going
Right.
to alter it, so you're not trying to remember everything else.
And then
Absolutely.
council
Yeah.
can choose what they ultimately would like to adopt from that. This is just a recommendation to them.
Yeah, so from this, we will refine that draft ordinance to be a more complete version. So all of the little changes are all there, and then they'll hold a hearing to adopt that ordinance, and your recommendation will be part of that consideration. If they don't adopt the ordinance, they could tweak it at a meeting, or they could say bring it back with a lot of changes, and we'll look at it again at another day.
Well, I would support B particularly. If you have an issue with that, I would support. I'm not going to make the motion, but
I'll make a motion. Just because I like being shot down every once in a while.
Go for it.
Okay. Are you entertaining motion?
I'm entertaining motions.
At this time, I'd like to make a motion to approve alternative number 1. The Planning and Zoning Commission can recommend that the city council adopt the changes to front yard parking and driveway standards as generally outlined in the attachment A, including A, permitting of existing driveway conditions, C, allowed for flared parking with a taper towards the side property line, D, establish a minimum driveway width of 8 feet, E, prepare a driveway design manual illustrating design requirements, F, limit front yard parking exceptions if rear parking access exists, G, modified parking lot paving, striping plan permit requirements, and the new driveway permit requirements, H, driveway and curb cutouts widths to match on-site driveway widths. This alternative is without item B.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Hey,
The motion is approved 3-2.
It's our toughest one so far.
Okay,
Wow.
moving on to item 8 is commission comments. Anybody have any comments for today?
What's going on for the next meeting?
So October 5th, is that the next? No, yes. Yeah, October 5th. I believe we have some rezoning applications that'll likely be on the agenda.
Okay. Just like to heads up. So,
I anticipate having the meeting, and I think there's at least one, maybe two rezoning applications.
Okay, are there any staff comments or were those that?
I think that's it. I think if you've been following the Ames Urban Fringe Plan, Story County Board of Supervisors did on Tuesday wrote a letter suggesting changes to the draft that's been forwarded to City Council. It's not on the agenda for next week, so City Council will look at those suggestions and give direction to us, to city staff, on how to proceed with moving ahead with the Fringe Plan. The reason I tell you that is because eventually a draft comes before you for a public hearing, because we're viewing it as an amendment to Plan 2040 to adopt a new Fringe Plan. So if you've been tracking that, it's not quite ready to get back to you, but if it stays on track, it'll be later this fall or for a new plan.
Great.
Okay, if there is no other further business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
make
moved.
motion to adjourn.